Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is Alan. In a little more than 3 weeks, on November 11th, 2018, it will not only be Veterans Day, but also the 100-year anniversary of the end of World War I. Hoobastank will also be playing at the Highline Ballroom. Hoobastank. With the last of the World War I veterans passing away in 2012, we lost an important part of history, one that has been since replaced by films with artistic interpretation. Now, these movies have an important job in piquing the interest of future generations. Each war in our past took a great toll on humanity, and it's up to us to learn from these terrible moments in history so that we can recognize and hopefully prevent the next war. These films need to strike a balance between historical accuracy and entertainment. Today we'll be looking at 4 myths perpetuated by World War I films. If I was going to recommend just one movie on this list, it would be Beneath Hill 60, and that's simply because it's such a unique and interesting story that you probably never heard of. Beneath Hill 60 follows the exploits of the first Australian tunneling company, attached to the Royal Engineering Corps. Australians are kind of like British people, but upside down. This film's major scenes take place before the Battle of Messines. While World War I is widely known for being the birthplace of many modern weapons and tactics, on the Western Front, deep underneath the trenches, the Australians, along with other Allied engineers, were using a very old siege technique that had been used all the way back since the Siege of Petersburg.
Close it up.
And also the Battle of Hornburg. We're talking, of course, about tunnel warfare, which leads to an extremely tense and exciting film. In it, we have Allied engineers digging tunnels beneath no man's land while German engineers on the other side dig their own tunnels in an attempt to stop them. Armed with stethoscopes to detect digging noises, candles to detect low oxygen, and canaries to detect poisonous gas, this was an extremely high-stakes conflict. Armed with sawed-down rifles, knives, pistols, and explosives, both sides were constantly trying to prevent the other side from breaking into their tunnels and collapsing it. Now, because the film is largely based on the real-life diary of Captain Oliver Woodward of the Australian Tunneling Company, the film is highly accurate. But if one does have any complaints, it might be how the British officers are portrayed in the film as pompous buffoons who are constantly sending the Aussies into meat grinders. The film is made by Australians, so I do get the sentiment. But it should also be mentioned that the Australians weren't the only mining team that dug and protected the 19 mines underneath the Battle of Messines. For more than a year, Canadians, Kiwis, and British engineers also helped prepare these mines. The Canadians were actually responsible for one of the largest mine shafts, which held around 100,000 pounds of explosives. In all, the 19 mines had almost 1 million pounds of explosives, and when they were set off, it would be the largest explosion the world would see until the atomic bomb test. An estimated 10,000 German soldiers were killed during the explosion in all sorts of horrific ways. Trenches were sandwiched together, crushing the soldiers to death within them. German pillboxes were thrown 100 feet into the air with soldiers still inside. Even so, not all the mines went off either. Water and debris were constantly seeping into the shafts, creating problems with the explosives. And one explosive cast would be set off by lightning in 1955, killing a cow. It also should be mentioned that the film needs subtitles, not just for the German scenes, but for the Australians as well, because I have no idea what the hell they're saying half the time.
You should let it waddle, get some more shut on.
But the lieutenant knew about the strata, Dad. How it holds up like. And that's why we kept digging.
In all honesty, this film probably shouldn't be on the myth list because it is quite accurate. But I wanted to share with you guys, and I do think it needs more recognition out there. Our next film is the exact opposite of Under Hill 60 because it's full of so many holes, it's a miracle that the planes in the movie actually were able to take off. Flyboys claims to be inspired by a true story, so it's given a lot of wiggle room. It follows the real-life Lafayette Escadrille, a French unit made up of American volunteers who wanted to join the war before the United States had entered World War I. So first of all, let's begin with the historical inaccuracies from a technical standpoint. There are a lot of inaccuracies with the planes and with the combat in general. For instance, they really do overuse Fokker triplanes and red planes. The reason the director states is so that the audience can distinguish the difference between the Allied planes versus the Germans. Then there were the cylinders on the rotary engines. They were stationary as if they were radial engines, which is something they really shouldn't have left out because it looks a lot cooler. Then there are the little mallets that the pilots were given to unjam their machine guns. In reality, they were given a wooden mallet. On top of that, the aerial dogfights were just highly unrealistic. Planes just weren't structurally sound enough or powerful enough to be able to handle such extreme maneuvers at the time. Now, I usually understand when small details are missing. I don't think it's a huge deal. There just aren't that many Tiger I tanks left, so I get it if you have to use a patent tank because of budget restrictions. But when you get so many things wrong like they do in this movie, it does become a problem, especially because the Lafayette Escadrille was a real organization. Eugene Skinner was based on Eugene Ballard, an African-American who left America for France to escape racial discrimination. He wanted to pay back his adopted country, so he fought in the French Foreign Legion, and then he became one of the first African-American fighter pilots and joined the Lafayette Flying Corps, not the Escadrille. You see, the Lafayette Escadrille was an actual unit. The Lafayette Flying Corps was just a designation given to all American pilots who had volunteered in the French Air Force. It's not an actual unit, but just the name. Some American volunteers like Eugene Ballard fought with various French units, including Escadrille 93 and 85, not the American-only Lafayette Escadrille. Flyboys kind of blends the members of the Lafayette Escadrille with the Lafayette Flying Corps, which causes a lot of the confusion we see nowadays between these two organizations. On top of that, one of the military advisors on set was a man named Jack Livesey, who was convicted of fraud and posing as a military hero, which might be why there are so many historical inaccuracies in this film. Although they did get the lion mascots right though. You had to be pretty ballsy to be a World War I pilot. The next movie I want to talk about is War Horse by Ron Howard. Just kidding, it's Steven Spielberg this time, I double checked. It shows us another interesting angle of World War I that we might not all think about, and that's the plight of horses. Now, even though we started the Humanity First movement, it doesn't mean we hate animals. As a matter of fact, I really do love animals. I'm just trying to warn us about animals that are actively trying to harm us or rape us, as in the case with dolphins and bears. Now, one animal I do like are horses. I think they're a really noble beast, and this film is an extremely dramatized story about the love between a man and a horse. Okay, maybe that's not the best way to put it. It's more like a companion love between a boy and a horse. That still sounds like bestiality. Okay, it's just like a classic Spielberg-style story with no bestiality. Now, I usually find Spielberg's balance between historical accuracy and entertainment pretty agreeable. But War Horse does go a little bit over the top. While I think it's okay to discuss the terrible conditions that animals had to live in during World War I think focusing on them instead of the 20 million humans that died is a little bit ridiculous. There's really not that many World War I films out there, so it's kind of sad that the ones that do come out and the one that's made by Steven Spielberg focuses on horses instead of the humans. Anyway, most of the uniformed soldiers, weapons, and military equipment in the background of this horse-centric film were rendered with typical Spielberg accuracy. But there is one scene that I kind of have a problem with, and that's during the frontal charge with all the horses. Now, horses were used in offensive assaults with varying degrees of success in both World War I and World War II. Heck, shortly after 9/11, Green Berets on horseback led 600 Northern Alliance fighters in a mass charge across 1,000 yards of open ground against about 1,000 Taliban fighters in a trench. It was probably the first time that fighters firing RPGs on the back of a horse successfully attacked an enemy position. So yeah, horses are still used in combat today in very special situations. That massive frontal charge we see in the film is actually based on true events. And in the film, Spielberg does portray these individuals as heroic, but also as foolish individuals who don't seem to understand how the modern battlefield works.
What? Did you think that a garrison on open ground would go undefended? Look at yourself! Who do you think you are?
And that's kind of not what actually happened. On August 24th, 1914, around the Belgian town of Alouche and Ordeny, sorry if I'm butchering that, the British 5th Division, a part of the British Expeditionary Forces, were being pinned down by a numerically superior German force supported by artillery fire. The 9th Lancers and 4th Dragoon Guards were brought to reinforce the British infantry, who were outnumbered at the time by 3 to 1. At first, the cavalry fought dismounted alongside the infantry, as they often did. Cavalry at the time were more like mechanized scouts rather than assault forces, as they are commonly depicted in movies. With no time to dig trenches or fortifications, the British were forced to quickly retreat. General Delisle, commander of the 2nd Cavalry Brigade, ordered both the 4th Dragoon and 9th Lancers to charge the heavily armed and unbroken line of German infantry. This was an extremely desperate and last resort decision by the general in order to prevent British forces from being completely overrun. Unlike in the film, the 9th Lancers and 4th Dragoon never ran into strangely unprotected German camps. Instead, they were immediately under heavy rifle, machine gun, and artillery fire. And that charge was subsequently stopped by 2 lines of barbed wire. They never really make it to the tree line where these obviously CGI horses jump over stoic German soldiers, who by the way don't even notice the horses. It's almost like they don't exist. So while the British did use cavalry in offensive charges in the earlier years of World War I, they only really did it in the most extreme situations. The members of the 9th Lancers and the 4th Dragoon Guard completely knew what they were heading into. And their fearless charge along with other infantry rearguard action bought just enough time for the 5th Division to withdraw and fight another day. So yeah, they were heroic, but they completely knew that they were going into a suicidal frontal charge, which kind of makes them even more badass. There aren't a lot of mainstream World War I films out there, especially ones directed by Steven Spielberg, so I am kind of upset they focused on the horses instead of the guys riding them, because they were really heroic. The Water Diviner is another film inspired by true events. And by true events, I mean World War I. It's kind of like if I made a movie about a steampunk Zeppelin pirate captain who fought against the Lafayette Escadrille and then said that the movie was inspired by true events. It's technically true, but complete BS. In the film, Russell Crowe portrays an Australian father who travels to Turkey in search of his 3 sons who all perished in the Ottoman theater. They all participated in the Gallipoli campaign, which was a failed attempt by Allied powers to seize Constantinople, or as it's called today, Istanbul. It was an incredibly bloody battle and the only major Ottoman victory during the entire war. Now, it might not be well known in America, but in Turkey and also Australia and New Zealand, it is very well known. Mostly because the Anzac committed so many troops to the battle. Now, the film has received criticism because of its anti-war approach and also humanization of Ottoman forces. Which is stupid. War is terrible and the Ottoman Empire was completely full of humans that should be humanized. Glorification of war is extremely dangerous. After all, the combined Gallipoli campaign caused 500,000 casualties. But the critics are right. There are some problems with this movie. If you're going to humanize and tell the story of the Ottoman Empire, you can't really leave out one major event, the Armenian Genocide. The start of the Gallipoli campaign coincided directly with the Armenian Genocide. The Young Turks, not to be mistaken with this YouTube channel, or at least that's what they say. Which is BS, right? I mean, if a German YouTube channel called themselves the Hitler Youth, you know exactly what they're going for. Anyway, the Young Turks were an extremist political movement made up of young officers that perpetuated the Armenian Genocide. They saw the Armenians as a potential threat to their total war strategy against the Allied powers. Turkish soldiers rounded up hundreds of thousands of Armenians, seized their property, and executed many of them and sent many others off to concentration work camps. In total, an estimated 1.5 million Armenians died. That's 75% of the pre-war population. Now, these numbers are disputed and many Armenian militias did fight back, which is the main reason why many right-wing nationalist Turks claim it wasn't a genocide but a civil war. But most of the world outside of Turkey does consider this a genocide. The Water Diviner was filmed in Turkey and had many Turkish advisors and also was released in Turkey, which is probably why the Armenian Genocide was left out of the film and not even mentioned, which is really a spineless and gutless move. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video about our 4 myths in World War I films. We really wanted to talk about another film, and that's Lawrence of Arabia. But honestly, that film has so much controversy surrounding it, it would really require an entire video just dedicated to that movie alone. If you guys want to see that, please do comment down below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button. My name is Alan, reminding you that life is a movie, and you are the protagonist.